Hey guys, Todd here, and in this episode we're going to talk about a topic that if you've been in business, if you've been an entrepreneur for any amount of time, you've probably been in this situation, and it's when you're in a slump. What do you do when you're in a slump? When you're in a dry spell, or maybe in a more extreme situation, you're thinking, man, I just want to light a match and burn the whole thing to the ground, to throw my cell phone in the garbage can and go to Mexico. This could also be titled, Step Back from That Ledge, right? So when things aren't going well, what do you do? I'm going to talk about some strategies because I've been there. And if you've been in business for a while, you've been there and you're probably going to be there again. If you haven't experienced a slump, then good for you. It's probably coming. So here's what we typically do. When things aren't going well, we tend to focus on the negative. We go into this downward spiral. Things just get worse and worse and worse. And we tend to shoot ourselves in the foot. In many cases, we start spouting off these self-fulfilling prophecies, right? We start talking about how bad things are going to get, and then no surprise, those things happen. Those things get worse, and then it contaminates the team, and it affects your trade partners, it affects your employees, it affects how you deal with customers, it affects how you are at home, and it just contaminates every part of your life. So bad things are going to happen. How do you deal with these bad things? So let's talk about some strategies for handling the bad times. And I'm not really sure there are any bad times. I'll explain that in just a minute. But what do you do when you're in a funk? What do you do when you're in a slump? What do you do when you want to just light a match and burn the whole thing to the ground? So here, where I'm located, we're close to Cincinnati, so I'm a bit of a Cincinnati Bengals fan. And in January of this year, the Cincinnati Bengals were in the AFC Championship game, had the opportunity against the Kansas City Chiefs. And toward the end of the game, there were a couple of calls made by the officials that were a little questionable. So here's the situation. Somebody on the Bengals gets called for a penalty. Flag gets thrown, and half of the stadium erupts with boos. The Cincinnati fans, of course. Half the stadium is cheering. The Kansas City fans, because it was good for Kansas City, bad for Cincinnati Bengals. But so the question was, when that ref threw the flag, was it a good thing or a bad thing? Was it good that he threw the flag, or was it bad that he threw the flag? And the answer is, well, it depends on who you talk to. And it was good for the Kansas City fans because it meant they got the first down and ultimately scored, ultimately won the game. Was bad for Cincinnati fans and for the Cincinnati Bengals because it hurt them, probably led to them losing the game. But the reality is, throwing that flag was neither good nor bad. The act of throwing the flag, the penalty wasn't good or bad. The only thing that was good or bad was the story that the fans told themselves about what it meant. Kansas City fans said, yes, this is good. This means something good for us. Cincinnati fans said the opposite. This sucks. This is bad. They told themselves a story. So there are no good things or bad things. Very rarely. Very rarely will you deal with any good things or bad things. They're just things, and the only thing good or bad about them is the story that you tell yourself about what they mean. So the first strategy of when you're in a slump is to separate observable facts from the story you're telling yourself about what it means. I'll say that again. Separate observable facts from the story you're telling yourself about what it means. One thing your brain is probably really good at is extrapolating information, telling stories, piecing things together, looking for threats, looking for how bad things are going to happen. I talked about that in a previous episode about how your inner critic is constantly searching the horizon for threats and catastrophizing. So step one is separate observable facts. What are the things that are currently happening? what was said, what was done, what is the situation, what are the observable facts. Make decisions based on that information, and then split off and separate the stories that your brain is telling you about what this means. You're going to lose a customer, someone's going to quit, you're going to have to downsize, you're going to lose money, all this stuff in the future that hasn't happened yet. That's the story. So separate observable facts and events from stories. The second strategy is to detach from the situation. You have to detach from the situation. You have to step away from it. You have to get out of the fire, so to speak. You have to get out of the weeds a little bit and somehow detach from the situation and examine what is going on. Detach from, probably the most important thing you could do is to detach from what's going on in your head and think about what you're thinking about. Examine your thoughts. What am I thinking? What is going on in my head? What are the voices in my head telling me? What's my inner critic telling me? What is fear telling me? And detach from your thoughts, detach from the situation, and think about what you're thinking about. Because your brain is not a great source of information when there's fear involved. Okay, so you have to detach and get this conversation into a more logical part of the brain. Third strategy, which is always a good strategy, it's a good way to prevent getting into a funk and prevent being in a situation where you find yourself standing on the ledge, and that is gratitude. Focus on what is going well. And if you will cultivate a habit of gratitude, then it will rewire your brain. You will not be so susceptible to these fear and scarcity, inner critic type episodes, and you'll actually see the good things that are going on. You won't be so susceptible to the Chicken Little phenomenon of the sky is falling, everything's going to shit. You'll be a little more immune to that. So spend some time every day in gratitude. If you're in a funk, definitely need to do it. Focus on what's going well. If you're not in a funk, good for you. I still recommend you spend some time every day in gratitude because it will help make you immune to the dry spells, the funks, the maybe I should burn the whole thing to the ground situation. All right, the next one, the fourth strategy is to control the controllables. Control the controllables. There are two buckets of things in every situation. There are the things you can control, and then there are the things that are outside of your control. Things that you have no influence over, no control over. You don't have control over the economy. You don't have control over weather, over politicians, over what customers do, trade partners, sickness, etc. So you need to remember the serenity prayer. Okay, you've probably seen this, but the serenity prayer goes something like, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, those are the controllables, and the wisdom to know the difference. So if you find yourself getting worked up about uncontrollables, things you cannot change, then that is a waste of time, my friend. You need to focus your energy on the things you can control. Okay? God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. The fifth strategy is to reframe the situation. All right? We tend to look at things in a negative frame. This is bad. Bad things are going to happen. I'm going to fill in the blank with something bad. It's helpful to reframe it because that's just the story you're telling yourself about what it means. That's the default story. The default story is typically, this is bad. But the reality is we get to choose the story we tell ourselves. Okay? Just like in that Bengals game, there is no good or bad in a situation. It's just the story we tell ourselves about what it means. And we get to choose the story. So Napoleon Hill talks about a strategy for reframing the story in his book, Think and Grow Rich. And here's what he says. Sometimes it appears there's a hidden guide whose duty is to test men through all sorts of discouraging experiences. Those who pick themselves up after defeat and keep on trying arrive, and the world cries, "Bravo! I knew you could do it." The hidden guide lets no one enjoy great achievement without passing the persistence test. Those who can't take it simply don't make the grade. Those who can take it are bountifully rewarded for their persistence. They receive as their compensation whatever goal they are pursuing. Hey, it's Todd here, and we'll get back to the episode in just a minute. But if you're like most builders and remodelers I talk to, maybe your business feels chaotic. You're working too many hours, you're not making as much money as you should, and it seems like every problem lands in your lap and too much depends on you. That sound familiar? But you may be thinking what you need to do is drill a series of 1 inch or 1 1/4 inch diameter holes around the perimeter of your office, insert sticks of dynamite, and blow the whole thing up, and then start over. Well, here's the good news. You're probably just 2 or 3 simple adjustments away from a completely different business. This is what I've found. It's not about working harder. It's not about selling more jobs. You don't need to fire everybody. You don't need to do a complete overhaul. There are not 1,000 things you need to fix, and you don't need dynamite. You just need a few moves that give you maximum results with minimum effort. And that's what I want to help you with. I want to help you uncover those things on a free business evaluation call with our team. Here's what we're going to do on your business evaluation call. We'll uncover the hidden profit that's already in your business. We'll outline the 2 or 3 simple adjustments that are going to give you the most bang for your buck. We'll map out a simple plan so you can have more profit, more control, and ultimately have a business that runs without you. And if it makes sense, we'll talk about how we can work together to help you make that happen. Here's the deal. We only offer a few of these calls a week, and not everyone qualifies. So if you have a wave of work coming at you, or you're planning to grow, now is the time to make those adjustments. Click the link in the show notes right now to schedule your free business evaluation call. So if you find yourself in a slump, if you find yourself in a tough time, you get to choose the story, and you can tell yourself the story. This is actually a very true story. This is not delusional, but you are in a persistence test. It's very likely that you are just sitting for the persistence test. And as Napoleon Hill says, there's a hidden guide who lets no one enjoy great achievement without passing the persistence test. So just understand, you're in a dry spell, you're sitting for the persistence test. The 6th strategy you can use is something that Jim Collins talked about in one of his books. I think it was Good to Great, and he called it the Stockdale Paradox. The Stockdale Paradox. And I'll just read an excerpt and a summary about that. Collins said, "Productive change begins when you confront the brutal facts. Every good to great company embraced what we came to call the Stockdale Paradox. And the Stockdale Paradox says that you must maintain unwavering faith that you can and will prevail in the end regardless of the difficulties, and at the same time have the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be." Collins said that every good to great company that they studied in the book Good to Great faced significant adversity along the way to greatness of one sort or another. In every case, the management team responded with a powerful psychological duality. On the one hand, they stoically accepted the brutal facts of reality. On the other hand, they maintained an unwavering faith in the end game and a commitment to prevail as a great company despite the brutal facts. Collins said, "We came to call this duality the Stockdale Paradox." The name refers to Admiral Jim Stockdale, who was the highest-ranking U.S. military officer in the Hanoi Hilton prisoner of war camp during the height of the Vietnam War. Tortured over 20 times during his 8-year imprisonment, 8 years as a POW. Stockdale lived out the war without any prisoner's rights, no set release date, and no certainty as to whether he would even survive to see his family again. When Jim Collins interviewed Jim Stockdale, here's what Stockdale told him. He said, quote, "I never lost faith in the end of the story. I never doubted not only that I would get out, but also that I would prevail in the end and turn the experience into the defining event of my life, which in retrospect, I would not trade. He was a POW for 8 years. He didn't know what the end of the story was going to be. And here's how he reframed the story. This is the story that Jim Stockdale told himself as a POW. I never lost faith in the end of the story. I never doubted that I would not only get out, but that I would prevail in the end and turn the experience into the defining event in my life. And he said, in retrospect, I would not trade it. Jim Collins said, I didn't say anything for minutes, and we continued this walk around the club during this interview. And Jim Collins turned to Admiral Stockdale and said, who didn't make it out? Who didn't make it out of the POW camp? And Admiral Stockdale said, oh, that's easy. The optimists. The optimists didn't get out. Jim Collins said, I don't get it. I'm completely confused. It sounded like he's contradicting himself. And Admiral Stockdale explained, the optimists, they were the ones who said, quote, we're going to be out by Christmas. And then Christmas would come and go, and they would say, we're going to be out by Easter. And Easter would come and Easter would go, and then Thanksgiving, and then it would be Christmas again. And they died of a broken heart. And Admiral Stockdale turned to Jim Collins and said, this is a very important lesson. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. Let me say that again. This is a very important lesson. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality. So that is the Stockdale principle. Stockdale principle is that you must maintain unwavering faith that you can and will prevail in the end regardless of the difficulties, yet at the same time have the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality. The next strategy comes from a movie. This was a movie that Will Smith portrayed, in which Will Smith portrayed a guy named Chris Gardner. It was called The Pursuit of Happiness. And I'm not sure this was in the movie, but I saw an event where Chris Gardner was speaking, and he talked about in his life, there he was, sleeping in a subway bathroom at night. He had his young son. He's sleeping on the floor of a subway or bus station bathroom because he was homeless, had no job. He has a young son he's trying to take care of. And he said, there I stood with my son asleep on the floor, looking in this piece of stainless steel that was the mirror. And Chris Gardner said, how did I get here? How did I get into this situation? And he had an epiphany, and he said, I drove here. He looked at himself and said, how did I get here? I drove here. I got myself here. And he said that was the turning point for getting out of that situation. He had to take ownership. He owned the fact that he got himself into that situation. And that was the first step toward regaining the power in his life to get out of that situation. So you need to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I drove here. There are things I've done probably that contributed to this. Maybe not in all cases. Jocko Willink and Leif Babin would call this taking extreme ownership. Take extreme ownership. Because if you're going to get out of a bad situation, the first step is to take ownership of the situation. Get out of victim mentality. Stop blaming other people. Stop blaming the universe. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. Take ownership and say, I drove here. And then here's a strategy that I find helpful when fear and anxiety are just on the rampage. I find that fear likes to live in the dark corners in the unknown about where what if lives, what might happen, what if things go bad, what if this happens, and then what if that happens. So I like this strategy that I call catastrophizing. All right, fear wants to talk about what if that happens. Let's go down that rabbit hole and answer the question, what if this happens? Well, so what if this contract gets canceled? What would you do? And then if that happens, then what would you do? And then what would you do? And what would you do? And you'll come up with some logical steps you can take. And you'll find that you probably aren't going to end up living in a bridge by a river, sleeping in a cardboard box. There are probably things you can do to avoid that situation. Fear and anxiety and your inner critic will tell you you're going to end up homeless, you're going to lose everything. There's a pretty good chance that's not the case. So when you have these things going through your head, and the chemical part of your brain, the part that has no language, it's the amygdala where the fight or flight response lives. You need to get the conversation out of that part of the brain into the logical part of the brain and start making plans. And answer the question, what if that happens? And just write these things down or say them out loud. Well, this is what I would do if that happened. And then if that happened, this is what I would do. Okay? The last strategy is one that I call mental hygiene. This is a mental hygiene exercise. You have all these thoughts going on in your head, and this is going to happen, and what if this happens, and these people are doing this, and all of the inner critic type stuff that's flaring up. So when I find myself being frustrated or anxious or in a funk, then I'll get out a piece of paper, and on the left side of the paper, I'll write down the stuff that I'm thinking. These irrational thoughts, fears, frustrations, speculations, stories I'm telling myself. I'll write those down on the left side and just write until they're all out on the paper. Then on the right side of the page, I will actually have a logical response to each of those things. It could be, well, that's just wild speculation, or there's no proof of that. Or this could be the catastrophizing exercise. Well, if this happens, this is exactly what I'll do. But you're getting these thoughts that are bouncing around in your head, all jumbled together in this big mess. You're putting them down on paper, exposing them to the light of day, exposing them to logic. And then you can actually have a meaningful conversation about these things. And then you may ask, well, what do you do with this mental hygiene exercise? Do you keep a journal? Do you track them? No. I wad them up and throw them in the garbage, because the real utility of the exercise is to get it out of my head, expose it to the light of day. Some of these things will be like, that's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. Or that's your fault. You need to take ownership of that. I drove here. I did that. That was me. And I need to do something about that. But the idea is get it out of your head, write it down, and then expose it to some logic and have a logical conversation. Is it controllable or is it uncontrollable? Is this a story I'm telling myself, or is it an observable fact? But go through this mental hygiene exercise. And that helps me quite a bit. So there you go. A handful of strategies if you find yourself standing at the ledge or about to strike a match. Separate observable facts from stories. Detach from the situation. Detach from your thoughts. Gratitude is huge. Remember the serenity prayer. Control the controllables. Reframe it. It's very likely that you're going through the persistence test, as Napoleon Hill would call it. Remember the Stockdale Paradox. This is another way of reframing the story, that this is going to be a defining event in your life. And don't hide from the brutal reality of the facts. Do some catastrophization. Look at the worst case scenario. Remember Chris Gardner's approach. Take ownership of the situation and say, I drove here. And then you can use that mental hygiene exercise to try to clean things up. So I hope that helps you. Keep in mind that it's not the things that are happening to you. It's not the things that are going on. It's the story you're telling yourself about what it means. And you get to control the story. So if you want a deeper dive on that, couple of great resources. One is Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich. Fantastic book. Another one is Ryan Holiday, The Obstacle is the Way. The Obstacle is the Way. Two fantastic books to help you take control of the stories in your head. So one of the fastest and most effective ways to upgrade your mindset, change the way you think, integrate these things into your life, is to get into a community of people that are doing the same thing every day, working on their business, upgrading their mindset, becoming CEOs of their business. And that's what we have here at Construction Leading Edge. We have this incredible program where we work with you to systematize your construction business like we've done with dozens of our other clients. And we'll begin to work with you on your mindset along the way. And one of the most interesting things about it is that for most of our clients, not only is their business and their bank account and their schedule radically different, but they are also radically different. They have more peace of mind. They sleep better. They're more present with their family. They're a better leader with their team. They understand the true value of what they deliver and the impact that they're having. And they have no problem charging a premium price for their work, being selective about who they work with, going after recruiting and hiring top quality A-level talent. So if that's what you want, then I would like to invite you to book a call to speak to us. Go to constructionleadingedge.com/apply, then book an appointment to speak to us. We'll get on the phone for 45 to 60 minutes. You can tell us what's working in your business, what's not working in your business, and we'll put our heads together and come up with a step-by-step game plan to get you exactly where you want to go and talk about the crucial systems you can put in place in your business to make your business run without you. We'll talk about the root causes of the biggest and most painful problems you're dealing with and how to solve those root causes, but also what needs to change in your mindset to get where you want to go. And if you want our help to do that, then we can talk about enrolling you in our program. If not, that's fine too. Either way, our goal is just to give you massive value. So go to constructionleadingedge.com/apply. Book that appointment to speak to us. It's absolutely free, and it'll be the best 45 minutes you've ever spent working on your business. Thanks. Hey, it's Todd here. Before you go, remember this. If your business feels stuck or chaotic, chances are you're only 2 or 3 simple adjustments away from unlocking more profit, finally getting your life back, and having a business that runs without you. We want to help you identify those adjustments on a free business evaluation call with my team. Click the link in the show notes to book your free call. Remember, calls are limited. Not everybody qualifies. So go book your call, and I'll see you next time.